Regularly, we offer these events as opportunities to connect you all with policymakers. And oftentimes, the subject of the Davenport discussion does not actually connect with the mission of the Davenport Institute, but today is different. It's a great pleasure to welcome David Campt here. I've known David for probably 5 or 6 years, connected with him originally when he was a facilitator and working with an organization called the Western Justice Center that was out of Pasadena. He is, if not the one of the best facilitators, group facilitators that I've ever been around. He worked for several years with an organization called America Speaks, which helped to facilitate very large-scale, multi-thousands of people, public engagement events around a variety of policy issues. And as you probably know, the mission of the Davenport Institute is to work with municipal governments, either through training or consulting, to make sure that the way that they formulate public policy is both more participatory and more inclusive. And to do that, it takes a certain kind of both perspective on what the role of the public is, but also a certain set of skills in facilitation. And so David actually brings a very interesting background. He has his bachelor's from Princeton in computer science, but he's matched that with both a master's and a doctorate in city planning and public policy from Cal. And so he brings together that unique set of experiences that brings both technology but also public policy to bear on his work in facilitating more inclusive public processes. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to you, David, and look forward to today's presentation. Thanks.
Thanks so much. We appreciate it. Welcome, y'all. Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Good
Good
All
afternoon.
right. They do more in the South, but we'll take that. We'll take that. We'll take that. So here is what I would like y'all to imagine. I want you to imagine a world where panel discussions start by giving each speaker information that can help them tailor their talk to who they're talking to. Imagine a world where large conferences begin with a plenary session where people are asked questions and everybody gets to see how they're connected to other people. Imagine a world where town hall meetings let people know who was there and who wasn't there, which groups were represented, which groups were overrepresented, and which groups were represented proportionally. Imagine that world. Imagine a world in which a pre-election debate, in that the participants, the audiences, chose the questions. All these things are possible, and they're possible right now. So the question that I hope we can really have some conversation about today is why is this not the world today? Why are we not using a technology that's basically affordable, easy to use, relatively reliable, and that would make our engagements more engaging and more productive? That's the background question that I'm hoping that we can look at today. In our 50 minutes or so, I'm going to try to go quickly through a few key points. One is that civic engagement specialists are producing a lot of bad meetings right now. Civic engagement specialists get minimal training in meeting design and facilitation. That instant polling is a powerful and grossly underutilized tool in facilitation. There's several interesting and unfortunate institutional impediments to more rapid dissemination of this innovation, and the widespread use of polling to make meetings better would be somewhat disruptive. So I'm going to try to run through those, and we'll have a conversation about that and hopefully wrap up on time. One of the things I'm trying to do with my book, it would be, my publisher would be mad if I didn't do like this with my book. It's called Read the Room for Real, and I'm stunned that it appears to be the first book about audience polling as a civic engagement innovation. There's a few books about it as an innovation in the classroom, but I don't think there's others about it as a civic engagement tool. One thing I'm trying to do with the book is to rebrand the technology. This technology is often called keypads or clickers or consensor or audience polling devices. The most common is audience response systems, or ARS. How would you say that? ARS, not good, right? Not good. So one of my objectives is to get a better name. I think it should be called speed polling to enhance input and knowledge. What would that summarize to? Speak, right? So I'll be calling them speak devices, and it doesn't matter whether it's your cell phone or your web-enabled device, but the point is, if there's a capacity in a meeting where every person can vote on something and you see the result, let's call that a speak device or speak technology. Oops, there you go. So one of the things you can do with speak technology is to find out who's here. Oh, you got that's right. There you go. Who's in the room? So, as I mentioned, it can be helpful in establishing a sense of community, and it can also be helpful in clarifying what voices might be underrepresented, so you can know what you need to be listening more for. We'll start out with a warm-up question. Do you have any tattoos? If you grab the device, if the answer is no, you don't see bumper stickers on a Bentley. That was said by the famous beauty philosopher. Press 1. If your answer is no, but you've considered it, press 2. If your answer is yes, but only those close to me can see it, press 3. If your answer is yes and it's sometimes visible, press 4. If your answer is have you seen my sleeve, press 5. If you don't know what a sleeve is, do not press 5. Okay, so, all right, so y'all are in the no category. By the way, the famous beauty philosopher was Kim Kardashian. Some people are telling that they say, can I vote again, and vote something else. So anyway, you see the idea. Ask a question, you press your response. I didn't tell you, but basically it's a situation where if you make a mistake, just press it again. So, you know, it's like you can vote as often as you like, but not in Chicago, so on your last vote counts, right? So just press again. It's very easy to use this technology. Which of these is closest to your level of experience with audience polling? Polling devices fear me, for I am their master. Press 1. You've planned some meetings where it was used. Press 2. You've seen polling used many times. Press 3. You've seen polling used a few times. Press 4. And if you're still trying to figure out how to turn this thing on, then press 5. Which is closest to your experience with audience polling. Okay, so interesting. So a third of us, have actually planned meetings where it was used. And this is I must be at an innovative, cutting institution. I have never seen that before. So the technology is moving. When I did the same question a few years ago, it's a very skewed answer. So there's a growing use. So part of what I'm trying to do, what this book is about, is trying to accelerate the time in which everybody is using it and it becomes a standard practice. That was an experience question. There's different types of questions. How many times have you traveled around the sun? If you've forgotten your 5th grade astronomy, that means how old are you? Fewer than 35, press 1. 36 to 50, press 2. 51 or better, press 3. So again, part of what can happen in a setting is you can ask questions that help people know how they're connected to other people. Obviously, this is I'm the oldest person in this room. That's fine. Okay. All right. Where are you, or where do you plan to be on that spectrum from academic to practitioner? So if you are or plan to be mostly an academic, then press 1. There's some word called pracademic, which is somebody who is kind of halfway in between an academic and a practitioner. Press 2. If you're mostly going to be a practitioner or are a practitioner, press 3. Okay, so we don't have any academics in the room. So we know who's in this room, and that might shape some things we talk about the dissemination of that technology, and as well as about we might get to more practical questions because of who's in this room about its use, as opposed to if this was a more of an academic room, we might talk about different types of questions. I now, as the facilitator, can make some choices based on who's here and what our particular interest would be based on knowing who's in the room. Okay. My first contention, civic engagement specialists are producing many bad meetings. Now, let's see if I need to spend time making that case. Let's just ask you that question. Think about all of the public meetings that happen in your jurisdiction. Setting aside the ones that you organize yourself personally, what portion then would you assess as very good meetings? The vast majority, press 1, most, press 2, about half, press 3, some but not most, press 4, a few, press 5, very few, press 6. Your assessment of what portion of the public meetings that happen in your area would you assess as very good? Okay, so clearly there's a lot of bad meetings happening. I don't need to make that point. This is the result I get all around the country. So part of what we have to recognize as people who care about civic engagement is that as a field, we're not doing very well right now. People go to meetings and they often are terrible, they often are boring, they often are not engaging. That is just somehow what we've come to accept. And so I would submit to you that people who care about civic engagement, we need to attack that problem because meetings are a core technology of democracy. So if meetings are bad, if this is a commonly shared feeling, we need to do something about that. And I don't think we're doing that much about that. According to a study in '89 by Hofstra, what is the best estimate of the value of time wasted in meetings that year? Now this is all meetings all across the economy. 370 million, 730 million, 3.7 billion, 7.3 billion, 37 billion, or 73 billion. This is $1989. So it's a lot of wasted time, but how much is that in your estimate? The correct answer is $37 billion. So it's not just in the public sector where we're wasting a lot of time in meetings. We have a problem in our culture with meetings. We meet a lot, but the meetings often are bad. So it's not. So this isn't just casting aspersions in the public sector on civic engagement specialists. It's a general problem. We do, as a society, as a culture, we don't know how to facilitate well. We don't know how to design well. And I would submit to you that people who think about the professions that face the public policy, city planning, social work, education, public health, we need to think about that. We can talk about managers, corporate managers too, but we're concerned about the public sector, we're concerned about civic engagement. There's a lot of time wasted in meetings. We need to fix that problem. Okay, here's my opinion. I think that people who get prepared to be civic engagement specialists, they don't get trained in how to design or facilitate meetings. One of the reasons that meetings are so bad is because this issue is not on the radar screen. It's not in curricula in those professions I mentioned. It's not in, if you look at non-profit management organizations that train people, that train companies in a variety of issues, technology, board management, facilitation is not something that is considered an important skill. I think it needs to be a core competency, given how important it is to democracy and given how bad meetings are. I think we should make that a core competency. Because again, hearing from people is a critical element of democracy. So let's just go with y'all right here. Which of these best describes how much training you've had in facilitation? Very little, less than 6 hours. A little, 5 to 10 hours. Some 10 to 20 hours. A lot more than 20 hours. My opinion was that as a general matter, and things might be different here at Pepperdine, but as a general matter, this is an unpursued avenue. Okay, so 75% of us, 3/4, have had either have had a little training, less than 10 hours of training. Yet, if we think about what you're likely to do as you go out, as you are released into the wild to go serve the public, organizing meetings, facilitating meetings will likely be something you frequently do. And you'll have to learn it just like I did, which is just figure it out, right? But a whole bunch of people are not figuring it out very well. That's why meetings are often not so good. This slide was supposed to do a cross-tab of the academics of your how much training you've had and what your status was on academic, but I didn't get here early enough to confirm that I actually were going to be talking about that. So again, my belief is that the public-facing professions, the ones that send people out to go serve the public and as vehicles for democracy, those professions, urban planning, public health, social welfare, education, public policy, we don't emphasize this. It's not even on the radar screen. Some of that is because it doesn't fit well within the academic calendar necessarily. Is it worthy of a course? Is it a practicum? We haven't sorted that out. But I think ultimately, we could solve that problem. Ultimately, it's a deeper issue about thinking that this is just something that's not that important. It's just something it'll all work itself out. And as we can see, it doesn't. We can ask ourselves the question, what would our society be like? What would our democracy be like if meetings were places where people got to be heard? If meetings were places where people felt connected to other people? What would democracy look like? What would our public meetings look like? What would our meetings within the nonprofit world, what would our staff meetings look like if we had a general practice of using more advanced facilitation techniques? This technology is one of them, there are others. What would it look like? What would our democracy look like if we considered facilitation a core competency? If we looked at it as an infrastructure issue, as a civic infrastructure issue, how we were doing on that, what would our civic institutions look like? What would our democracy look like? I'm actually going to skip the next question. As I mentioned before, I'm not just slamming or giving feedback to graduate schools. All across this country, there are civic engagement institutions on campus. Sometimes they focus on service learning, or sometimes they're called service learning or community service. There are a variety of names. They're all around this country, but what they do is to train, mostly undergraduates, some graduate students. They try to create avenues where young people can learn some skills, be of service to their community. And these institutions are also trying, to some extent, they're trying to do some public relations work for the university. They're trying to put the university in a stance of service to the local community. Perfectly admirable. Those institutions, too, need, I think, to emphasize, at least to put in facilitation as a core competency. People, when they go out into the world, in a world of increasingly complex problems, need to know how to hear from a group. They need to know how to hear from a group of 6, of 12, of 20, of 100. There are techniques to be learned, but we do not emphasize how to do that. In graduate schools, in civic engagement institutions, in the organizations that train nonprofit leaders, this is below the radar screen. I think that's a problem for our democracy. So before I get to talking more about polling, I want to stop and take questions. It would be kind of weird for me to just talk at you if my whole point is we need to hear from people. So I want to pause and get any reaction so far to what I've said. Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you've mentioned is that sort of doing some of the upfront polling allows you to sort of see who's represented and not, and maybe underrepresented. And I can see where that's really beneficial in terms of sort of traditional groups and saying, okay, well, clearly we have, 90% over 50 educated people in this room, whatever the case is. But can that be dangerous when you get more into viewpoints to where people are like, oh, everyone agrees with me, so I don't really need to listen to the 20% of people, or like, can that be a bit of an issue?
Oh, sure.
Things?
So
Are there ways to balance that?
So I think that part of the reason why this isn't just a technological issue, it's a facilitation issue, is because of all the many choices that you have to make if you're going to facilitate a group, including using technology. So one thing that's important to do is to make good choices about when you ask opinion questions. For my strategy, typically, at the early part of a meeting, is to not do that. Is to try to ask questions that will help people feel more connected to each other on an experiential basis. You might ask questions that help people identify with a set of values, the set of which they all share, but they might have preferences within that. So seeing that helps people feel more connected to each other as opposed to in a stance of opposition. So part of the difficulty is you have to make an assessment about when you ask the question and how strongly you ask it. That gets at the purpose of the meeting. The purpose of the meeting is to work through some difference of opinion. You don't want to avoid it, or you don't want to give the impression that you are afraid of it. On the other hand, so you have to be on an arc to get to it, but you don't necessarily want to make that the first question, because then it could do precisely what you just described. So that's why I'm saying it was important to do is to look at speak technology as a very powerful new tool in the arsenal of people who are convening and facilitating groups. You still have to use it well. Mm-hmm.
I would love this technology if I were a tyrant, right? Because I would be able to collect information about people's opinions and find ways of getting and facilitating my own control.
Manufacturing consent.
Well, it gives you a means of understanding where it's easiest to find consent, and therefore to craft propaganda that would do so. So I don't know if this is inherently a democratic, whatever we mean by that word. I don't much care for democracy. I do care for self-rule, which is not the same thing as democracy, which tends to lead to tyranny. So when I think of this, I think of the town hall meeting of New England, which of course did not have a secret ballot, which did not vote unless power was called for, because the desire there was to deliberate till you get a consensus where you didn't need to vote. But people would stand up and hold their own when they were unpopular opinions, which seems to me a crucial thing for self-governing people to do. And to hide behind anonymity seems to me a betrayal of self-rule.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. I'm not sure we can do it all, but let me tell you a story that was related to me after I did a set of meetings in Tahoe for a group. So this minister came up to me and he said, "I love the technology. Let me tell you about something that happened." So this guy's a Lutheran minister, and he talked about an experience a few years previous when they were trying to wrestle with the issue of whether LGBT folks should be ordained or not in that church. And one year they had like a traditional vote on it at some big conclave, but in this way that they did it, you had to declare your own vote. And in that year, the vote went 2/3, no, they shouldn't be allowed, and yet 1/3 they did. The next year, they used some type of polling technology that allowed anonymous voting, and it flipped. Now, things are moving on that issue. I'm not sure that within that population, it flipped like that in 1 year, or whether that is the impact of people having the capacity to do a secret ballot to express their real opinion. So I certainly think that we need to advocate for people having the courage to express their opinion publicly. I think that that's an important goal to have from a civic development standpoint. On the other hand, if it is the case that there are social pressures that affect people and might make them not do what we think they should do, then we have to ask ourselves the question: Do we meet the democracy where it is? Like, to what extent is that? Do we still want to hear from people how they honestly feel, given that they sadly need the protection of anonymity? But if that's how they actually feel, what does that mean? I'm not sure how many presidential elections would be different over time if people had to declare their vote publicly also. So I'm just saying, I don't disagree with your point from a human development standpoint, but I don't know if that means we do not use a technology that leverages the realities that a lot of people are afraid to voice themselves publicly. So I don't want to. We'd have to have a long conversation about democracy versus self-rule. I think you obviously have thought about that a great deal. I guess the question that I am concerned with democracy. Maybe I need to think about this more deeply. I guess my point is that the capacity of people to hear where a group is on an issue. I mean, maybe, I guess anything can be used by tyrants. I think it ultimately is a huge step forward in the 10,000-year journey of human cooperation. I think that if we think about the long run of people in groups making decisions, often not in a democratic or self-rule way, but by leaders, I think that it is useful, it is valuable to think about, there's a new thing now that only in the past 50 years can you instantly take the pulse of a group, and the process of doing that isn't so burdensome. That's a new thing, and I think it raises important questions about what does it mean for groups to make decisions.
But I would just say that's an interesting point, Ted, but I've seen many town meetings organized without this kind of technology, really organized in the same way that the New England Town Hall may have been, and I've seen those tyrannized by groups as well. I mean, you just need to go to the Santa Monica City Council meeting to see 15 people line up behind a microphone, all in matching t-shirts, and they will tyrannize the meeting for you. And so I think you make a very good point about how there's an opportunity for domination by the facilitator. I would just say that it's not a fair trade-off to say that the current way that we convene many of our public meetings is also not open to tyranny. Because I've seen it happen many times. And so I think as long as it's done in combination and a mixture where this is part of also other opportunities for people to get up and speak and offer their opinions in the midst of this, but I do think there is, to balance the conversation, that many of our public meetings open themselves in public comment to tyranny, and in many ways that does dissuade people from even showing up at some of these meetings because they know they can be dominated by organized interest. I mean, that's manicure also, right? I mean, that's the understanding that the groups themselves can take over the meetings the way that we've currently structured them.
Last one before I move on. I want to take y'all back to those horrible town meetings from 2009 about healthcare.
Yeah.
Remember those? In that August of that year, the way that people who really were opposed to any kind of healthcare national program dominated those meetings. I would just have you imagine that at the start of those meetings, suppose that the congressperson said, okay, before we get started, I just want to find out who came today. So if you could identify as liberal, press 1, middle of the road, press 2, conservative, press 3. Now, some people might game the system, but a whole bunch of people would answer that question like they actually feel. And what gets in the room at that point is the fact that this particular gathering is skewed a certain way. Suppose you show that result and you say, "Oh, this is fantastic." You know, I don't normally get a chance to talk to this many conservative folk. You know, do you see those figures over there about who's in our district? This is fantastic. I get to talk to people who are different than the usual mix I talk to, right? That's the enthusiasm at the beginning. But when people start railing later on about how you're a bum, you're not representing us, etc., well, I'm sorry you feel like that. I have a lot of people to represent. Remember who's here and who's not here. So I guess my point is that part of what I think happens with speak technology is you shift people's attention away from just what I think to also what we think. And that shift, I think, is an important consciousness shift from a spiritual level and also from practical level of democratic governance. Having people shift from me to we is an important shift in their thinking. And I think that the technology tends to, it doesn't do that for everybody, but it tends to lead to that. Actually, what I'm gonna do, I'd like to actually pass out these pieces of paper. You help me pass these out? Yep. So great. So I want y'all to think about the top two. Thank you so much for that. Everybody take two. You're gonna use one of them. We'll use one of them later. I want people to think about the top two reasons why meetings of over 15 people don't go well. Top two reasons, whether it be big public meetings or private meetings, or the top two reasons why they often don't go well. Just jot just a couple, just really quick. Top two reasons why meetings over 15 people do not go well. Y'all say a lot of them don't go well. Why is that? There's two. What is that?
I got it here.
But I need you to be ready to write it down.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Okay. So I'll be collecting those later. But the reason, part of what I'm doing is I'm going around trying to shift how people have meetings, is I want to refine the question I'm going to ask you, which three of these problems are the biggest reason meetings of 15 people often don't work well? So you can choose up to three of these. Autopilot. Presenters, audience just kind of go, they just do what they've always expected to do. Domination by most aggressive voices. Lack of a clear agenda, number three. Folks not comprehending critical presented points, number four. People stuck in their own position, number five. Lack of clear direction before adjournment, number six. Key issues not raised, number seven. The experience is energy draining and even demotivating, number eight. Key people or subgroups not present, number nine, or something else, number 10. So if you think of what you wrote down is all on this list, then you can just 10 or 0. So you get three on this. Top three reasons that meetings over 15 people don't go well. Seconds. Just press one and then the other, whatever you think. And if it's something else, press 0. Okay. Go ahead. a whole bunch of people said something else tied with dominate most aggressive voices. Just holler out, what were something else, the people who voted something else, what were some of the ones on your list? Some people, 17% of people voted something else. Y'all wrote it down before you did it. That's why I wanted y'all to do that. So who voted for something else besides this list? Mm-hmm.
I said timelines are not met. They allot a certain amount of times to certain people, and they always exceed them.
Got you.
So,
Okay.
I was gonna say repetition. Like some meetings, they just repeat the same thing
Uh-huh.
over and over and over.
Gotcha. Uh-huh.
I feel that effective meetings have to be focused on the mission of the meeting.
Uh-huh.
When you have more than a certain number of voices, where that's at least what happens to be, the meeting becomes participant focused and not focused on people that are really there.
Huh.
And I
Participant focus, not mission focus. That was the distinction you're making? Interesting. Well, that's interesting. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. I'm going to collect those later because, part of what I'm trying to do is to refine my making the case about the way that I think technology just can really affect a lot of these things. The speak technology can't address all of them, but can address a lot of them. One of the, as we already talked about domination most aggressive voices, part of the value is that you're hearing from everybody. And you get to see, you know, you get to see where hardcore positions are within a broader context. And everybody gets to see that. We acknowledge, everybody can be acknowledged, but we can make sure we're not going down paths that represent strongly held minority views and not mistaking that for where the majority of people are. Let me just run down some of the things that I say in the book, things I found to be the reasons why I think this technology is really a paradigm shift. Great engagement by meeting attendees. I think some of these things are well known and researched from academic literature that's focused on the use in the classroom. Again, this is under-researched from a civic engagement standpoint. But it is well known that people are paying more attention if you're smartly using polling aligned with the flow of a meeting. Presenters can't go on autopilot as easily. The audience feels more connected to them. So, again, not as easily. So if I ask a question and there's some response, I'm almost obliged to say something about it, to speak to it a little bit. So what that does is it gets me out of a kind of an autopilot thing where I'm just going to do my standard thing. Now, people still can do it, but it's a little bit harder to do that. You're almost pushed to respond to what's in the room. Hard data is generated and instantly available. I've often done meetings in which, and Pete's seen this, where you mobilize to actually produce a report that people have walking out of the door. So that's not impossible if you're using a technology that is sort of instantly generates data and you can mobilize somebody to put the data in a template that makes sense. And people feel like this meeting wasn't just a talking in the air, we really generated some real data. That really helps people stay more engaged. You can basically get a clearer advice about the group's sense of problems or solutions. And important values are promoted. Reflection, inclusion, and democracy. Let me say a little about reflection, for example. So I did a meeting one time in Richmond, Virginia, and it was a sort of a midday meeting. It was about gentrification, I believe, and it was 60 people. And so we did, and this group that sponsored it was a group that does sort of racial reconciliation work, and we wanted to mobilize around current issues in the community. So then we asked demographic questions, how much money people made, and how long they've been living there, and various questions like that. And so when we when we paused and we asked people how they react to what they saw, one woman stood up and she said, I realize that I have a prejudice. And she said, do you remember the income question? I'm in the group that made less than $25,000 a year. I'm not among the 40% of y'all that make over $100,000 a year. And I would not have believed that people of your income and wealth would come to a meeting like this, that would care about the community. So I have to look at myself and whether or what does it mean that I was so sure that people like you wouldn't be at this meeting and would care. And I have to look at what are the impediments to me working with other people if I carry around that prejudice. Part of what I think happens, it doesn't happen to everybody all the time, but if you ask good questions that help people see themselves in the context of a group, some people actually become more reflective, not unlike that woman. And that's an important thing to foster. Again, you go from me to we. Me is still in it, but you see yourself often a little more clearly. So I guess my point would be, given that we have a relatively affordable, relatively easy to use, relatively reliable technology that can make meetings more engaging, more productive, more reflective, and promote democracy, then why are we not using it more? Why are institutions that are part of the civic engagement industrial complex, why are we not promoting that as a core capacity? That's the lurking question out there. I'll ask this question, we'll skip on to the conclusion. There are about 15 million speak devices used worldwide. What is the closest to percentage used outside of K through 17 classroom? Right? So basically, used for civic engagement, right? If you divide up the world into which they're used for classrooms and they're used for outside of classroom, what do you think is the closest percentage of how many are used outside K through 17 classroom? 85%, 70%, 50%, 35%, 20%, and 10%. Yeah, y'all getting hints now. The correct answer is 10%. So basically, the civic engagement community is not with this. And the people who are making money off of these devices they're not looking at the civic engagement community. They're looking at classrooms. Which makes sense, but that still raises the question of, as a civic engagement community, what are we doing? By the way, one of the things you can do is to set up teams, right? And if you have a longer meeting, sometimes you can set up teams based on either let people know they're on a team or not, and you can get kind of interesting, energetic dynamics by having, whether it's even number tables, odd number tables at a big meeting, or a variety of different ways of dividing up a room. Often that sense of competition, again, can create fun at a meeting. I think part of what we want to do is to create more energized and innovating meetings. And we need to think about a variety of techniques for that. My sense is that we're in an era of polling anyway. If you call the cable company, they want you to do a survey at the end of your long wait for them. If you go to the drugstore, they want you to do a survey. If you look at TV talent shows, they want you to poll. There's even NFL teams that use polling to choose the song that's going to be played between the fourth and third quarter. They do that at halftime. So people in entertainment are starting to get with the idea that, oh, we have this, everybody has a device, we can vote, it makes people feel more connected. I can go on YouTube and you can find ministers using this as part of their sermon. I just saw just a couple weeks ago, remember when Donald Trump came out with his tax plan? On MSNBC, they had a live running poll using this thing called a Bing, a Microsoft Bing or Pulse, I can't remember, Bing Pulse, and where you're seeing people respond to it. So if the whole world is moving towards the wisdom of crowds, from the collective brain power, then why is the civic engagement community not doing that? That's what I'm perplexed by. Okay, we're going to move forward. We have limited time. As I've tried to grapple with why is this so slow to take off, I'm told about the various interesting barriers. I've been told that nonprofits don't want to invest in the technology or in facilitation that's more advanced because they don't have enough meetings to make it worth it. That's reasonably legitimate. I've been told that philanthropy doesn't want to choose solutions. I've been told that. I've been told that the benefits are not sufficiently linked to a specific problem and we don't have enough studies. Those might all be true, but again, I would argue that given the potential value of this, a different way of thinking about meetings, we need to figure out, are we at an unnaturally low level of usage of this? Like if there was some, are we at the equilibrium point of use of this technology, or are there some barriers that the people who think about the field as a whole need to try to help us get past? Are those natural impediments? My feeling is that philanthropy, capacity building institutions, public facing professions, and civic engagement institutions need to recognize, to me this is like Excel. Like I'm the oldest person in the room. Does anybody here remember a world before the spreadsheet? It's a different world. Like I was talking to a nonprofit executive yesterday. She said, I don't know how we did budgeting before spreadsheet. I just don't know how we did it. We did it, but I don't know how we did it. But now using Excel is considered a core competency of a professional. I would submit that using advanced facilitation techniques, including this, needs to be looked at in the same way. Last point, and this goes somewhat to what you were talking about. I think that this technology is disruptive, because ultimately, if you start to ask people questions and act like you're going to respond to the answer to some extent, they will begin to question what questions are you asking and not asking. Short story about that. When I worked for America Speaks, one time we were we were pursuing a contract with a large urban university. And like many large urban universities, they had a history of land grabs that the community doesn't like. And they had just done another one, and they wanted to mobilize some big town meeting in order to make people feel better and make them feel more included in the decision making about it. And so they had seen these kind of meetings we had done around the country and various other topics. And so we started talking through design issues, and because they were worried about being protested by community organizers, et cetera. And when we started to, midway through the design cycle, before we started really putting out, before we had chosen a date, the big wigs, even above the people we were dealing with, basically said, are you telling us that as part of your process, you're going to make up questions in the course of a day in response to what people have said? Well, yes, of course we're going to do that. That's going to make the meeting more responsive to people. So what happens if people organize to pressure you to ask other questions? What are you going to do? Essentially, they did not want to have the conversation of whether they should continue on with their development. They want to just have a conversation about how. Now, by dispersing a technology that's essentially about eliciting voice from people, one of the things that a leader or a convener has to consider is, am I going to be pressured later to ask questions that I don't want to ask? If I'm asking the employees about the dress code, what if they notice that I can ask questions and make a question on the spot, and they want me to ask questions about salary equity? How do I tell them that I'm not going to do that? Should I tell them I'm not going to do that? Should they be allowed to do that? So part of what I think might be lurking about in the limited dissemination of this technology is that it's scary. Not only is it more work to think through what does it mean to ask, to make a meeting go more effectively by asking at the right time the right questions, but what if I get pressured to ask questions I don't really want to put on the table? So I think that's real, but as thinkers about civic engagement, I think we need to think about that. Again, how much democracy do we actually want to have, and in what setting? And what are the issues in which we want to go to the population we're dealing with? I guess the last point, this relates to what I just said. As I was writing the book and thinking about how do people use speak technology, I realized that you put a hierarchy in how you're relating to the participants. Sometimes you ask them questions because they're your consumers. You have some sort of ongoing relationship with them, and you just really want to find out their lifestyle or their practices, their habits, and you want to understand them as consumers. Just on a one-time basis, you want to know how they're feeling right now about this meeting. Sometimes people are your customers. You have a longer-term relationship with them. You understand how they're thinking about the world so you can serve them better. You're a nonprofit association, and you want to, and I did something like this. You want to know which of your members are using which kind of services so you can better tailor that. Sometimes you want to ask them questions because they're your counselors. You look at them as esteemed advisors. You're trying to get direction from them. And sometimes they're your collaborators. You're actually in partnership with them. And their voice matters because you're in a collaborative relationship. Part of what the technology does is surface that. In the long run, it surfaces that. In the short run, it's nice and it's fun and it's, hey, we did this. But in the long run, as this technology becomes ubiquitous, which I think it will eventually, I'm just trying to shorten the time. The degree to which these relationships lurk beneath any question will become what needs to be thought about. So, I want to give more room for more comments and questions. I know I've probably gone too long.